They were looking at East Asia in the early modern era. And so last time we left off with China, they were actually still under Mongolian rule, under that Yuan dynasty. But the Ming dynasty is going to drive the Mongols out of China and establish a new Chinese dynasty, the Ming. And so the Ming dynasty starts with Hong Wu. Hong Wu was actually a peasant, grew up in poverty. His parents died when he was young. He actually grew up having to beg for food. And as rebellions start to break out, he leaves a Buddhist monastery where he had been staying and goes and joins one of these rebel groups and is able to work his way up through his fighting ability and courage to lead this group of rebels, and then continues to build that group of rebels up into a formidable army and uses that army then to defeat his rivals and defeat the last of the Mongol rulers and drive the Mongols out of China. And so once he reestablished rule, they drove the Mongols as far away as possible. That was one of his biggest goals. And as he did, that's when they build the Great Wall of China. And so the Great Wall of China that you think of when you think of the Great Wall of China was built during this period, during the Ming Dynasty. And there had been previous walls, but what they basically did was combined all of these earlier walls into one long continuous barrier. And the Great Wall of China varies between 30 and 50 feet tall, and it in total is about 1,500 miles long. And the whole purpose was to protect China from Mongols and other nomadic invaders. Once Chinese rule was reestablished, they're also going to bring back all of those characteristics and traits that you think of when you think classical China. So they bring back the huge bureaucracy, and they reassert Confucianism as the central ideology. They bring back the Confucian examination system and create an elaborate bureaucracy and ensured that bureaucrats were loyal to the central state. In fact, they had an odd practice of corrupt bureaucrats would actually be taken out in public and beaten on their bare buttocks. And some of them were beaten so severely they actually died, and even those that didn't die were so humiliated that they never really recovered. They're also going to move the capital to Beijing, and they move it north because it was closer to those nomadic groups, so they could keep a closer eye on those nomads. They're going to build the Forbidden City in Beijing as a place for the emperor and the upper level bureaucrats to reside. They even extend the Grand Canal further north all the way to Beijing to bring food and other supplies into the new capital. It's also during the Ming Dynasty that we have the Zheng He expeditions. And we talked a little bit about the Zheng He expeditions in the previous era because technically they took place at the end of the post-classical period. But they took place under the second Ming Emperor Yongle. And Zheng He was a Muslim eunuch who was commissioned to oversee ultimately 7 voyages of exploration for China. And the purpose of these voyages was to seek out new tribute relationships for China. And the idea was that they would collect tribute from new places, and in return, those places received trading rights with China. And so these voyages made it as far as the eastern coast of Africa, but ultimately, after the death of the second emperor, the new government, the new emperor that took power, stopped supporting these voyages. And this was for several reasons. First off, the cost of these voyages. They really weren't bringing in a whole lot of wealth in return. And so they felt that that money would be far better spent defending their borders against the nomads like the Mongols. Also, as the scholar gentry were reestablished and Confucianism was reestablished, they saw exploration as a weakness. It went against Confucian values. They argued that everything they needed was in China, so they didn't need to look outside of China. And so as a result, China's going to end those voyages of exploration and kind of turn increasingly inward. And they even put limits on the size of ships that could be built from that point on and how far these ships could travel outside of China. And so China's withdrawal from the Indian Ocean and exploration in general, in a lot of ways, paved the way for the Europeans to dominate the seas. We look at reasons for the decline of the Ming Dynasty. It always starts with the decline of the central government. As the central government begins to decline and you have weak emperors who become kind of isolated in their life of luxury, that opens the door for many other problems. And so with these weak emperors, that led to factions in the bureaucracy. Groups like eunuchs basically come to control most of the bureaucracy. And public works begin to fall in disrepair. Trade begins to be disrupted by bandits and pirates on the oceans. Government corruption becomes more widespread, and these bureaucrats begin to influence these emperors and actually preferred weak emperors that they could manipulate in order to increase their own power. Famines break out, and as famines break out, peasants begin to rebel. And ultimately, it's these rebellions that are going to bring an end to the Ming Dynasty. Internal rebellions are going to overthrow the Ming Dynasty, and a nomadic group from the north called the Manchurians are actually brought in to help restore some order. And instead of just staying and restoring order, they're going to take over. And these Manchurians are going to bring in the last of the Chinese dynasties, the Qing Dynasty.